Today we will look at Jewish history. So let's review what we learned about Jewish history so far. Now remember that for most of human history, the Middle East has been the wealthiest part of the world. And as we discussed before, the Levant, especially Jerusalem, is the center of the world because it connects all the major civilizations, okay? You have Egypt, Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and over here you have the Persians. And over here is the Mediterranean, okay? As you can see, basically all roads lead to Jerusalem. So whoever controls Jerusalem controls the major trade access point, which is the most profitable part of an empire. And so for these empires, it's always been a problem of how to keep Jerusalem under control because Jerusalem, whoever controls Jerusalem, can always choose to switch sides, right? So if Mesopotamia controls Jerusalem, what the Egyptians will do is bribe Jerusalem to switch sides. And this keeps on going over and over. And they tried many different techniques on how to control Jerusalem. The Babylonians tried to take captives, hostages, and that didn't really work as well. So the Babylonians decided to destroy Jerusalem, okay? And with it, the Israeli identity became splintered and scattered. And this is the Babylonian Empire. But eventually what happened is that the Babylonians will be conquered by the Persians. And the Persians will adopt a new technique to control Jerusalem, which is divide and rule. They will create the Jewish identity implanted in Jerusalem, and that will create conflict with the locals. And the Jews will not be forever loyal to Persia because they are a foreign entity within the Levant. And only by swearing loyalty to Persia can they maintain control over the Levant. And in return, the Persians will give the Jews financing to build their second temple. So at this point in history, a Jewish identity emerges, and there are three pillars to the identity that continues even today, okay? So the first pillar is they become a monotheistic religion which believes that Yahweh is the only God, and they're the chosen people of Yahweh because Yahweh had a covenant with Abraham. Yahweh promised Abraham that your people will control the promised land, okay? And the promised land extends from the Nile in Egypt to the Euphrates in Mesopotamia. Okay, that is the promised land. That's the first pillar. The second pillar is the Jews must follow the law of Moses because the law of Moses is the law of God, the Ten Commandments, right? And the law of Moses over time will be divided into the Torah, which is the written law, and the Talmud, which is the oral law. Okay? The Torah is basically the 5 books of the Bible, the first 5 books of the Bible. And the third pillar is to use the Bible as the collective memory of the people. Okay? So the Jews believe the Bible, what happened in the Bible, is literal. It is actually what happened. And by believing that the Bible is literal and true, then you become a Jew. Okay, and that's why the Jewish identity is very flexible. Okay, so at this point in history, when the Jews swear loyalty to Persia, there are some characteristics that will change over time. The first major characteristic is that the center of worship is in Jerusalem, the second temple. Okay, so if you're a Jewish person, you must make animal sacrifices to Yahweh, and therefore the Sadducees, these are hereditary priests, they are the ones who control the religion. Then there's very strict laws that govern how people behave. So for example, you must rest on Sabbath. You also cannot marry outside your religion. You must be circumcised, okay? So there are all these restrictions on how people behave. Over time, what will happen is that the Jews will expand across the world. A lot of Jews will work as mercenaries in Alexander the Great's army as he conquers Persia. And as the Hellenistic world comes into being, Jews will move around for economic opportunities, right? They will work as officials, they work as artisans, they work as tradespeople, as merchants. And so they're scattered around the Hellenistic world. And as we discussed, at this point in history, the three major cultures that we've looked at, the Jewish culture, the Greek culture, and the Persian culture will merge together in a process we call synchronization. And that gives birth basically to Western civilization. Unfortunately, what happens is that over time, because the Jerusalem is so important, and because the Jews believe they are a special people who only worship the one true God, that will cause conflict with the Greeks. Okay? The Greeks also are very chauvinistic, very proud people who believe their culture is superior. And quite honestly, a lot of Jews will convert to the Hellenistic lifestyle. Okay? But this causes conflict. And ultimately, this will culminate in something called the Maccabean Revolt, where a certain group of Jews decide to rebel against the Greeks. And even though they're a minority, even though most Jews actually do not support them, because of their religious conviction, because of the will of God, they will triumph and they will establish the Maccabean kingdom. And this victory is celebrated today in something called the Hanukkah festival, okay? Hanukkah. And that's a celebration of the Maccabees' revolt against the Greeks. And the reason why is the Greeks wanted the Jews to celebrate their religion as well. They wanted to turn the Second Temple into a site to worship Greek gods. And so the fanatical Jews rebelled against that. Okay? All right. But this kingdom of the Maccabees will not last very long. Again, the problem is that Jerusalem, it is the nexus of empires. And so what will happen is the Romans will come and take control over this area. And the Romans are actually worse than the Greeks. The Romans are even more chauvinistic, more discriminatory towards the Jews. And this will launch three major wars between the Romans and the Jews. The entire Jewish diaspora will revolt against the Romans, and this will lead to many, many Jews being massacred because the Romans are vicious people. In the year 70, they burned down the Second Temple to destroy the morale of the Jews. And because they destroy the Second Temple, this causes a shift in the Jewish religion. Because remember, at this point in history, the Second Temple is a site of Jewish worship. This is the house of God. This is where Yahweh lives, okay? So when the Second Temple is destroyed, what happened is that the Jews, many Jews will choose to convert to Christianity, okay? Because remember, we discussed how Paul created Christianity as a mechanism for Jews to still be Jews, but at the same time be Roman as well, okay? That's the idea of the Christian religion. But those who stay become much more fanatical. In fact, they develop a very messianic eschatological attitude, meaning the end of the world is coming, God is coming to destroy the Romans, and we must show our loyalty to God. And so they keep on the fight, even though they've lost the war against the Romans. They will go into the Arabian desert where they will incubate a new religion called Islam, and they will prophesy the coming of the Messiah, who will turn out to be Muhammad, right? So at this point in history, the Jews must leave Jerusalem because the Romans basically kicked them out, and their religion will splinter into many different factions. But the major characteristic is that they've gone from temple worship to worship of their law, okay, the law of Moses. And so the rabbis come into power. Before, it was the Sadducees, the priests who control the temple, who are in charge. Now it's the rabbis. The rabbis are basically the Pharisees, those who teach the oral law of Moses. Okay, so they become the new elite in the Jewish diaspora. And so as we discussed, a lot of Jews at this time convert to Christians. All the early Christians were Jews, okay? And as we discussed, what will happen is those Jews who are most fanatical, they will escape into the Arabian desert and they will incubate Islam. And eventually, Islam will conquer the world. And at this point, they feel as though they've achieved the Messianic age. And they have returned to Jerusalem. Now, the Jews believe that in the Messianic age, the Messiah will come, lead them to victory, bring all the Jews back to Jerusalem, and build the third temple and usher in the Messianic age. Okay? And that's what they believe happened. And so this is the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and this is meant to be the third temple. Over time, what will happen is they will change it to become a center of Islamic worship. But in the beginning, it was really the third temple. And so at this point, a lot of Jews convert to Islam as well, because they think that Muhammad is their Messiah. Okay? So a lot of Jews are converted to Christianity and Islam, but there are a lot of Jews who do not, and they settle throughout the world.